There is a sacred mystery surrounding those whom God chooses. They do not fit easily into the patterns of this world. Their steps seem out of rhythm with the cadence of the crowd. While others chase applause, they are drawn into silence. While many gather in comfort, they are summoned into wilderness. This is not coincidence, it is design. The chosen ones walk alone because their destination cannot be reached by company. They are called to climb mountains too steep for the multitudes, to see horizons only visible to eyes trained in solitude. To be chosen is to be separated, not for isolation's sake, but for consecration. The path is narrow, the nights long, and the misunderstandings many. Yet in that silence, the voice of God grows louder. In that solitude, purpose takes form. Every prophet, every reformer, every true servant of the kingdom has known this divine loneliness. It is not a curse, it is a calling. And though the world may never understand why the chosen ones walk alone, heaven knows, for in that quiet journey they are not abandoned, they are being prepared. Divine isolation is one of the most misunderstood dimensions of the life of a chosen one. When God places his hand upon a person, he does not immediately thrust them into crowds or platforms. Instead, he withdraws them. He separates them from what is familiar and comfortable. It is the pattern of divine election. Separation always precedes revelation. Before Abraham could become the father of nations, he was told to leave his homeland, his relatives, and everything familiar. Before Joseph could reign in Egypt, he was torn from his family and hidden in a dungeon. Before Moses could deliver Israel, he spent 40 years alone in the desert. This rhythm is not accidental. It is God's signature in the lives of those he chooses. Divine isolation feels like rejection, but it is actually refinement. When God calls someone, he begins to strip away every dependency that could compete with his voice. The chosen are not permitted to find comfort in the crowd because the crowd dilutes conviction. Their solitude is the forge where obedience is purified. In isolation, God deals with motives, ambitions, and fears. The noise of the world must be silenced so that the whisper of heaven can be heard clearly. The chosen one learns to discern the difference between the echo of human applause and the quiet approval of God. There is something sacred about being hidden. Hiddenness is not absence, it is incubation. God hides those he intends to reveal at the right time. In the dark places where no one applauds, character is being sculpted. The world often celebrates visibility, but heaven celebrates obedience in obscurity. It is in those unseen seasons that the chosen one learns dependence, patience, and faith. They learn that promotion does not come from human networks, but from divine timing. When God isolates a person, he is not punishing them. He is preparing them for weight they could not carry otherwise. Yet divine isolation can feel brutal to the flesh. The heart questions, why am I alone? Why doesn't anyone understand what I'm carrying? Even Jesus experienced this. He withdrew from the crowds to pray alone, spent nights in solitude, and faced Gethsemane with only the Father to comfort him. His disciples slept while he agonized. If the Son of God himself found it necessary to walk alone in certain seasons, should his followers expect less? The chosen life is not the easy life, it is the separated life. Many mistake the silence of God for his absence, but in truth, it is often his deepest form of involvement. When God isolates you, he is closer than ever, not speaking loudly, but shaping deeply. The potter works best when the clay is still. Divine isolation is that stillness, a place where distractions die and destiny is molded. There, the chosen one learns to trust God without evidence, to obey without validation, and to believe without applause. In a world obsessed with connection, divine isolation appears strange, but those who are truly chosen cannot be conformed to the crowd's expectations. Their steps are governed by a higher rhythm. They are drawn by unseen hands toward unseen purposes. The separation is not about superiority, but about sanctification. God does not isolate to elevate ego. He isolates to establish integrity. What looks like loneliness is actually alignment. The chosen are not being left behind. They are being led ahead quietly, deliberately, by the author of their destiny. So when the chosen one finds themselves walking alone, misunderstood and unseen, they must remember this truth. Divine isolation is not God's rejection. It is his invitation, an invitation into deeper intimacy, clearer revelation, and unshakable faith. The solitude that feels like loss is often the very soil where destiny takes root. For those whom God chooses, walking alone is never truly being alone. It is walking hand in hand with the invisible God, who prepares them for visible purpose. The weight of revelation is not something the human heart can carry lightly. When God imparts insight or divine understanding to a chosen one, it comes with a heaviness that few can comprehend. Revelation is not simply information, it is illumination that transforms, confronts, and disrupts. It shatters comfort zones and demands response. Those who carry it often find themselves misunderstood because revelation separates them from the ordinary flow of thought. When you see what others cannot, you cannot live as others do. The chosen one bears a vision that others might dismiss, mock, or fear, and that awareness creates an inner solitude deeper than any physical isolation. When God gives revelation, He also tests the vessel that receives it. The chosen one must wrestle with what they have seen, discerning when to speak and when to remain silent. Not every insight is meant for immediate broadcast. Many must be guarded, nurtured, and allowed to mature in silence. The prophets knew this pain. Jeremiah described it as a fire shut up in his bones, something too intense to contain, but too sacred to expose recklessly. The weight of revelation is that tension, the struggle between divine compulsion and divine restraint. It is a burden that refines humility, because revelation without character becomes arrogance, and arrogance corrupts what was meant to heal. Revelation isolates because it cannot be shared with those who have not been prepared to receive it. Just as deep water is dangerous for those who cannot swim, deep truth is perilous for those whose hearts are unready. The chosen one must learn the discipline of loneliness, understanding that divine secrets are entrusted to those who can bear them in silence. When Joseph shared his dreams prematurely, it provoked jealousy and betrayal. When Moses revealed his identity before his time, it forced him into exile. The timing of revelation is as important as the revelation itself. God entrusts truth only to those who have learned to carry it with wisdom, patience, and reverence. To carry revelation is to walk with a sense of divine weight pressing upon the soul. It changes how one perceives everything: time, people, priorities, and even pain. What once seemed trivial now appears sacred. What once felt urgent now feels temporary. Revelation shifts the center of gravity in a person's life, anchoring them to eternity rather than the fleeting opinions of men. That anchoring makes them appear detached, even strange, to those still living by earthly logic. The chosen one begins to see through the lens of eternity, and that vision cannot coexist comfortably with the values of the crowd. The world celebrates comfort, but revelation calls for consecration. The world pursues pleasure, but revelation produces purpose. The two cannot walk together. There is also a cost to carrying truth in a world that prefers illusion. Those who bear revelation often suffer rejection because light exposes darkness, and darkness resists exposure. The more truth you carry, the fewer places you fit. But this discomfort is not cruelty, it is confirmation. The weight of revelation proves that you have been trusted with something eternal. It is God's way of shaping the soul into a vessel of accuracy, not popularity. The chosen one learns to live before the face of God alone, seeking His approval above all others. Ultimately, revelation is both gift and burden, both privilege and pain. It brings clarity, but demands crucifixion of ego. It opens your eyes to heavenly realities, but also reveals the brokenness of earthly ones. And in that contrast, the chosen one must walk carefully, humbly, and often alone. For the more you see, the fewer will understand you. But this solitude is sacred. It means God has shared His secrets with you. And though it may feel heavy, that weight is holy, for it signifies trust. God does not reveal Himself lightly. He entrusts revelation only to those willing to bear its lonely brilliance in faith, knowing that one day, what was seen in secret will shape the destiny of many. The wilderness is not a place of punishment. It is a place of preparation. Every chosen one must pass through it. It is the divine classroom where faith is tested, motives are purified, and intimacy with God is deepened. The wilderness strips away everything unnecessary, comforts, distractions, and dependencies, until all that remains is the voice of God and the response of the heart. It is not the crowd that builds conviction. It is the silence of isolation, the emptiness of uncertainty, and the pressure of unseen warfare. The chosen one cannot escape this season, because it is here that they are transformed from being called to being ready. The wilderness principle runs through every story of destiny. Before Moses stood before Pharaoh, he spent 40 years herding sheep in Midian. Before David ruled over Israel, he fled through caves with nothing but faith and a promise. Before Jesus began his ministry, he faced 40 days alone in the desert, confronted by the enemy himself. The pattern is unmistakable. Great calling demands great solitude. God never sends an untested servant into battle. The wilderness is his proving ground, where character is built and dependence on him becomes absolute. The wilderness exposes what comfort conceals. In seasons of abundance, it is easy to claim trust in God, but in seasons of lack, that trust is revealed for what it truly is. The chosen one learns that God's provision is not always abundance. Sometimes it is survival. Manna falls one day at a time, never in bulk, forcing daily dependence. The brook may dry up, as it did for Elijah, teaching that even divine provision can shift when the assignment changes. The wilderness removes the illusion of control and replaces it with the reality of trust. You cannot manipulate outcomes here, you can only obey. It is also in the wilderness that the chosen one confronts their inner self, the fears, doubts, and hidden weaknesses that cannot survive in the presence of destiny. When everything external is stripped away, the internal becomes exposed. The wilderness reveals idols you didn't know you worshipped: comfort, recognition, self-reliance. It shows the cracks in your faith and the depth of your obedience. Yet, in that painful unveiling, God does his deepest work. He wounds to heal, humbles to exalt, and empties to fill. The wilderness is not endless, but it is essential. Those who try to escape it too soon forfeit the maturity it was meant to produce. Every delay, every disappointment, every closed door has meaning in that barren land. God uses the wilderness to shape sensitivity to his voice. When there is no noise, even the faintest whisper of his spirit becomes unmistakable. When there is no one else to lean on, his presence becomes the only reality. That is why many emerge from the wilderness not weaker, but stronger, refined, disciplined, and anchored in unshakable faith. The chosen one eventually learns to stop fighting the wilderness and start learning from it. What once felt like exile becomes encounter. What once seemed like silence becomes revelation. The wilderness transforms from a place of suffering to a sanctuary of intimacy. It is where the chosen one learns not just about God, but from God. Every grain of sand becomes a reminder that divine preparation often looks like desolation before it looks like destiny. So, when God leads you into a wilderness season, do not despair. The emptiness you feel is not abandonment, it is construction. The loneliness is not rejection, it is formation. You are being refined for an assignment that requires resilience, humility, and clarity. When the wilderness season ends, you will not emerge the same. You will emerge with a faith that cannot be shaken, a vision that cannot be blurred, and a voice that carries the authority of one who has walked with God through barren places and lived to testify that he is enough. To be chosen is to be misunderstood. The path of divine purpose is rarely obvious to those who watch from the outside. When God sets someone apart, the instructions they receive often make no sense to those around them. Their obedience may look like rebellion, their silence may be mistaken for pride, their faith steps may appear as foolishness. The chosen one walks a path that defies logic because it is directed by revelation. The world operates by reason, the chosen operate by obedience. And that difference creates a gulf of misunderstanding that no explanation can fully bridge. Every great servant of God has endured this tension. Noah built an ark in the sunshine while people laughed. Abraham left everything familiar, not knowing where he was going. Joseph spoke of dreams that made even his family resent him. These were not madmen, they were visionaries. But visionaries are always misread by those without vision. The chosen one cannot seek validation from the unchosen. God's instructions are personal, and those who haven't heard his voice cannot understand his process. The chosen must learn to find peace in being misunderstood, trusting that divine vindication will come in its time. The misunderstanding is necessary, for it reveals where your loyalty lies. When you are misjudged for obeying God, you must decide whether you will live for applause or alignment. The crowd loves conformity, it fears conviction. The chosen one must learn to stand firm in solitude, unmoved by criticism, because obedience to God often brings temporary rejection from man. This is not cruelty, it is calibration. God uses misunderstanding to detach you from the need for human approval. He allows the sting of rejection to sanctify your motives, to teach you that true service seeks his pleasure alone. Being misunderstood also protects the mystery of your calling. If everyone could understand what God is doing in your life, they might try to interfere, advise, or even control it. God conceals your journey to preserve its purity. Others may question your decisions, doubt your timing, or mock your restraint, but they cannot see the full picture. They don't know the covenant conversations that shaped your obedience. They don't hear the whispers that wake you in the night. To them, your actions seem strange. To heaven, they are sacred. The chosen one must learn to bear that misunderstanding without resentment, knowing that hidden obedience is the truest form of worship. Even those closest to you may fail to understand. Family, friends, and mentors may misinterpret your silence, your separation, or your focus. It hurts, but it is holy. God allows this so that your dependence shifts entirely toward Him. When others cannot affirm you, you learn to draw strength from His presence. When your motives are questioned, you learn to rest in His vindication. When your path is lonely, you discover His companionship. What begins as pain becomes power, the power of knowing that divine purpose does not need public approval. The chosen life is not for those who crave acceptance. It demands the courage to obey when misunderstood, to trust when isolated, and to endure when mocked. The misunderstanding is part of the molding. Every accusation, every misjudgment, every season of invisibility presses the chosen one deeper into God's heart. And there, perspective changes. You begin to see that the misunderstanding of others is simply the evidence of a mystery too great for human explanation. So, when you find yourself misunderstood for doing what God has asked, do not defend yourself. Let your fruit speak. Let time tell. The same God who gave you the vision will also bring vindication. Those who once questioned you will one day understand that your steps were not confusion, they were consecration. The chosen one must walk in quiet confidence, trusting that being misunderstood by men is a small price for being understood by God. Heavenly assignment always requires earthly detachment. When God calls someone for His purposes, He begins by loosening their ties to the things and people that would compete for their devotion. It is not that relationships or possessions are evil, but they can easily become anchors when God intends flight. The chosen one is called to live by a different rhythm, and for that, attachments must be redefined. What others cling to, the chosen must release. What others celebrate, the chosen may be asked to surrender. This detachment feels like loss at first, but it is actually liberation, a freeing of the soul from the gravitational pull of the world so it can rise to divine altitude. Every true calling begins with separation. Abraham had to leave his homeland, his father's house, and everything familiar before God revealed the next step. Elijah was commanded to hide by the brook, away from the noise of the nation he would later confront. Jesus often withdrew from the crowds to align Himself with the Father's will. This pattern is not coincidence, it is necessity. You cannot serve heaven while clinging to earth. The chosen one learns that divine alignment demands emotional and spiritual detachment from anything that competes with obedience. God will not share His throne with our preferences. This detachment does not mean indifference or coldness. It means reordering priorities under divine authority. When you are chosen, your life ceases to belong to you. Every decision, every relationship, every opportunity is filtered through the lens of assignment. You may love deeply, but cannot be led by emotion. You may appreciate blessings, but cannot be controlled by them. God's purpose becomes the governing principle of your existence, and that shift often offends those who do not understand it. They may interpret your focus as arrogance, your boundaries as pride, or your silence as distance, but what they perceive as withdrawal is actually worship, obedience to a higher command. Earthly detachment also protects the chosen one from the illusions of control. The more you release, the freer you become to follow divine direction. Detachment is not about loss, it is about readiness. When God calls, there must be nothing in your hands that keeps you from moving. Lot's wife looked back and turned to salt because her heart was still tied to what God had called her to leave. The chosen one learns to travel light, understanding that destiny requires mobility. What you refuse to release will eventually restrict your reach. This detachment extends even to personal ambition. The chosen life is not about self-promotion but divine commission. God cannot fully use a person who is still entangled in the need to be seen, celebrated, or successful by worldly standards. The chosen must die to that hunger for validation. Their reward is not applause but alignment with eternal purpose. This kind of surrender feels like death, but it leads to resurrection power. When God becomes your only anchor, you discover a stability that no earthly attachment could provide. Over time, detachment transforms from pain into peace. What once felt like sacrifice becomes satisfaction because you realize that God never takes without giving something greater. He removes distractions so he can replace them with direction. He breaks attachments so he can bind you to his will. The chosen one learns to trust that whatever is surrendered into his hands will either be returned refined or replaced with something eternal. In the end, heavenly assignment is not about escaping the world but transcending its control. The chosen are called to live in the world yet not be owned by it. Their hearts belong elsewhere, tuned to heaven's frequency, moving according to divine timing. They become pilgrims with purpose, free from earthly entanglements, available for divine deployment. And though the world may never understand their detachment, heaven calls it devotion. For the chosen one, true freedom is found not in possessing much, but in holding nothing that competes with God's call. Though the chosen one often walks in solitude, they are never truly alone. What seems like abandonment to human eyes is actually companionship in its purest form. God's presence, though invisible, becomes the most tangible reality in their life. In moments when no one understands, he does. When every door closes, his remains open. The chosen learn that divine fellowship is deeper than human company, and that the presence of God is not a doctrine, it is a dwelling. This awareness is not born in comfort, it is discovered in isolation. Only when everything else fades do they realize that he was the constant all along. The chosen one's journey is marked by seasons where human support evaporates. People leave, betray, or simply fail to understand. At first, the loss feels unbearable, but with time, the chosen begin to perceive a divine pattern. God allows certain people to exit not out of cruelty, but to make room for his voice. When all earthly noise is silenced, his whispers become unmistakable. The chosen begin to sense that they are part of a quiet fellowship, the fellowship of the few who have learned to walk with God alone. They are not isolated, they are initiated. Their solitude becomes sacred space. Their loneliness turns into communion. This companionship transforms their relationship with God from belief into experience. It is one thing to know about God, but another to walk with him daily in invisible conversation. The chosen begin to see his fingerprints in small details, timely provisions, inner promptings, unexplainable peace. They come to recognize that every lonely path was actually lined with his guidance. Like Elijah in the cave, they learn that God's voice is not always in the wind or the fire, but in the still, small whisper that fills the silence. The chosen ones become intimate with that whisper, for it sustains them when nothing else does. Yet, this awareness does not make the path easier. The companionship of God is not an escape from hardship. It is empowerment within it. The chosen still face trials, temptations, and tears, but now they carry an invisible strength. They understand that God is not merely beside them, but within them, guiding each step. This is the mystery of divine fellowship. The more isolated you are from men, the more connected you become to him. What begins as loneliness turns into partnership, and what felt like loss becomes love. Even Jesus exemplified this paradox. Though surrounded by disciples, he often withdrew to be alone with the Father. On the night of his greatest trial, when his closest friends could not stay awake to pray, he found strength not in their presence, but in communion with heaven. The chosen must learn this same discipline. They must walk so closely with God that even betrayal cannot break their peace. When the outer circle fails, the inner presence remains. This divine companionship also redefines how the chosen see others. Once they have tasted the faithfulness of God's presence, they no longer cling to people out of need, but love them out of overflow. Their relationships become healthier because they are no longer built on dependency, but on divine sufficiency. The chosen one becomes a carrier of God's presence, extending the comfort they have received to those still wandering in loneliness. Over time, they come to cherish the solitude they once feared. The loneliness that once felt suffocating becomes the sanctuary where they hear heaven's secrets. They understand now that isolation was never punishment, it was an introduction. God withdrew them from the crowd so he could introduce himself personally. And once you have walked with God in that intimate fellowship, You can never be the same. You no longer fear being alone because you have discovered the one who never leaves. The chosen one walks a narrow path, yes, but they walk it hand in hand with the eternal. That is not loneliness. That is destiny's greatest companionship. Separation always comes before revelation. Before God displays a chosen one publicly, he develops them privately. The unseen seasons of formation are not wasted time. They are sacred preparation. Every great assignment begins in obscurity, in places where few are watching and even fewer are listening. The chosen one's first stage is not a platform, but a process, and that process often looks like isolation. While others seem to advance, the chosen are hidden, waiting, questioning, and wondering why their path feels delayed. But delay in the kingdom is not denial, it is design. God hides his instruments until they are ready to bear the weight of what he intends to release through them. In the hidden places, God does the most important work, shaping character to match calling. Many people desire revelation, but avoid refinement. Yet revelation without refinement is dangerous. God reveals truth according to capacity, and capacity is built in seasons of separation. The chosen one learns patience, discipline, and sensitivity to the Spirit in obscurity. These qualities cannot be taught in crowds, they are forged in silence. Before David ever wore a crown, he learned faithfulness in fields. Before Esther ever stood before the king, she was prepared in secret chambers. Before Paul ever preached to nations, he spent years in Arabia being emptied of himself. God never rushes his process, because what he forms in private determines how you stand in public. The chosen one's separation is also a season of revelation about identity. In isolation, the noise of comparison fades, and God begins to reveal who you truly are, not through mirrors of public opinion, but through the reflection of his word. It is there that you learn that your worth is not in what you do, but in who he called you to be. You discover that destiny is not performance, it is partnership. The chosen are separated so they can hear God's definition of them before the world tries to label them. Without that clarity, even success can become a trap. Revelation often comes when everything else is stripped away. When the chosen one has no audience, no affirmation, and no visible progress, their spirit becomes fertile ground for divine truth. The absence of distraction creates the atmosphere for illumination. It is in the quiet places where visions are born, directions are whispered, and purposes are clarified. The chosen learn that revelation is not the product of striving, but of surrender. When you stop trying to make something happen, God begins to reveal what he has already prepared. But separation can be painful. It often feels like exile. People forget you, doors close, opportunities vanish, and it seems as if heaven itself has gone silent. Yet even in those moments, God is working beneath the surface. The roots of destiny grow downward before they ever break the soil upward. The deeper the calling, the deeper the isolation. The chosen one must trust that God's hidden work is greater than what the world can see. When he finally reveals you, the fruit of that hidden season will speak for itself. When revelation finally comes, it changes everything. The chosen one emerges with a clarity that cannot be faked and a strength that cannot be shaken. They move with quiet authority because they have seen what others have not. Their words carry weight because they were forged in waiting. Their confidence is not arrogance, but assurance. They know the God who called them, and they trust his timing. The wilderness becomes their witness, the solitude their sanctuary, and the separation their strength. So, if you find yourself in a hidden place, unseen and unknown, do not despise it. That is where God refines his chosen. Separation is not the end, it is the threshold. The revelation that follows will not only define your destiny, but will impact generations. God hides his best work until the appointed time, and when the time comes, the one who walked alone will walk forward carrying heaven's light for the world to see.